Now, the Ukraine conflict has also spurred an internal political debate within Israel over how many non-Jewish refugees the country should be willing to take in. Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked, whose authority extends over border controls, has taken what some call a minimalist position, only now conceding that the country will allow some 20,000 Ukrainians who were already residing in the country before the invasion to remain, while also granting permits to a further 5,000 non-Jewish refugees escaping the war. Now, that stance spurred a demonstration last night outside Shaked's home, with dozens calling for Israel to allow in more refugees. Ukraine's embassy in Israel is now supporting a petition to the High Court of Justice against Israel's entry limits for Ukrainian refugees. The court will hear the suit this week, which argues that Shaked is violating bilateral agreements between Ukraine and Israel without proper authority, and her moves also violate international conventions on refugees. Well, this evening, Shaked agreed to exempt Ukrainians with relatives in Israel from the entry cap, but defended her overall policy, speaking a short time ago at Ben Gurion Airport.
Israel is the national home of the Jewish people. I suggest to all of those who criticize Israel, go to Terminal 1, see how hundreds of new immigrants come here every day. 450 are arriving here today from Ukraine who are escaping the fights. And we receive them. We turn them into citizens. No other country is dealing with this scale of immediate absorption. And despite the fact that they attack me and criticize me, I do not forget that first and foremost we are the homeland of the Jewish people, and we will invest most of our efforts in those entitled to move here.
Well, joining us is advocate Tomer Warshaw, owner and director at Tomer Warshaw Law Firm, speaking to us from Jerusalem. And Mr. Warshaw, thanks for joining us. You're arguing to the High Court of Justice, the Supreme Court, that Minister Shaked is exceeding her authority in setting this refugee policy. Why is that? Doesn't she have that authority?
Good evening. First of all, she doesn't have it because this was the governmental decision to sign an agreement with the Ukrainian government in 2010 to exempt tourists from needing visas to Israel. This is number one. Later on, it was ratified by the Israeli government decision and also another judicial order that contracted it in the Israeli law. The minister, no matter which one, cannot take decision instead of the government. And we said the first argument was that, of course, she can try to convince the government. We know that there are many wings within this government with different ideas. We thought that, first of all, it has to be done the correct way, the legal way. So because of that, because of our petition yesterday, we already heard the way you described that the Minister of Interior already changed this decision of hers before, and now to allow relatives of Israeli citizens to enter freely. But we don't stop here because this announcement doesn't change the lack of authorization that we find in her decision. And we also think there are many other groups of Israelis and Ukrainians that need attention. First of all, what about relatives of residents, Israeli residents who are not citizens yet? What about relatives of foreign workers, Ukrainian foreign workers who work here legally and are also devastated for the family members? These people, the Ukrainian refugees, indeed can find shelters all over Europe. But we need to understand, the fathers are left in Ukraine to fight. The mothers and the children are separated and going elsewhere, and they need emotional support, not only financial support. They're traumatized. So, of course, they will be looking to get this support with their relatives. Now, no one can imagine that Ukrainian refugees will choose to fly to Israel and spend money on the flight tickets instead of having all the benefits they have in Europe, unless they have chain of support of relatives in Israel. So we said that these borders should open because this is our need to do, our moral need according to the conventions.
Let me jump in there, because you argue it's not just a moral need, but her moves, besides violating, let's say, Israeli laws or protocol, also violate international conventions. How so?
First of all, we have the Refugee Convention from 1951. Israel was one of the leaders in doing so because of the Holocaust, of course. And we were the one to say that the state all over the world, all the states should join in to support and allow refugees within their boundaries. So, of course, it goes both directions. We cannot say now that we are blocking completely all the foreign refugees who doesn't have the right to return to Israel, which is what happened until our petition yesterday. So we think that the right for returnees is one thing. They will come to get citizenships. They're the one to have rights because of the law of return. It's a totally different position than the foreign refugees that we have the moral obligation to accept here in Israel. And what I also suggest to remember, that all the numbers that were spreading around, 100,000 returnees and so on, no one knows exactly how many it will be. And I think it's much smarter to just watch day by day to see how many refugees, how many Jewish people are entering the country, to try to control it day by day, and to be more considering about the people that have nowhere to go.